Hi folks, welcome back to another episode of All the Basses. Today we have a good one. We've got a 70s Les Paul Triumph bass with pickups designed by the man Les Paul himself. Let me tell you a little bit about this one. Now, I am no pickup expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm going to try and explain this to you the best I can. Similar to the alembic pickups that we just looked at in the Serek Metropolis bass, these are low impedance pickups designed by Les Paul himself. A quick crash course in electronics. You've got your current, you've got the amount of electricity going, you've got the voltage, the force at which it is flowing through those lines, and then you've got resistance. We don't live in a vacuum, there's resistance. Just think of like wind resistance when you're falling, or friction or anything like that. There's electrical resistance too. Now, resistance in terms of pickups is a DC or direct current measurement. And that's an okay measurement for determining a pickup sound if you're comparing it to a pickup of a similar construction. Let's take like a Strat single coil, for example. If you had 10 different Strat single coil pickups all constructed the same with the same bobbins, the same wire, the same magnets, DC resistance would do a good job at telling you how each of those pickups was going to sound in comparison to the others in that range. But once you start throwing in different types of wire, different types of magnets, different pickup constructions, humbuckers, etc., DC resistance doesn't really give you an accurate snapshot of what a pickup is going to sound like. Yet still we seem to use that one the most. Impedance, if I'm understanding this correctly, is the measurement of AC resistance or alternating current, which is actually how a guitar or bass circuit operates, with alternating current. So it's a similar measurement. It's going to give you sort of an idea of how bright or bassy a pickup might sound. However, I think most experts agree that inductance is really the measurement to look at. However, to get the inductance of a pickup, you have to be able to measure the strength of the magnets, and a lot of people don't have that technology. You can do some more reading on that. I'm going to link a couple of articles down below, one in particular by Seymour Duncan. That's a great read. I'm also going to link you to the Fly Guitars website, who has wonderful information on all things Epiphone and Gibson of the days of yore. So this bass, introduced sometime in the 70s, it is a short scale. We have the bridge shifted slightly forward, so it's still a pretty big bass, but it's a heavy body, so it still balances very well. But it is that short 30.5-inch scale. We've got a 3-piece mahogany neck and a sort of 2-piece mahogany body. I don't know if you can see there's this veneer line here, probably just to save on having to get really thick chunks of mahogany. They sandwich together 2 pieces with I don't know, some kind of veneer, whether it's maple or mahogany, not quite sure, but it is a solid body and this is a heavy instrument. It does have sort of a carved top to it, which is nice. It's got a belly cut. It's actually a very comfortable instrument. It sits well in the lap, balances really perfectly. And despite the fact that the bridge is shifted pretty far forward, you still don't have a very long reach over here. The neck is actually nice and slim too. It's just a 1/16 over jazz bass width, so 1 9/16 as opposed to 1 1/2, and it's slim front to back. We've got sort of an Indian rosewood board with the block inlays, got that nice black binding, the really cool diamond inlay on the headstock. It really is sort of a premium instrument, and it feels, it feels such too. When this bass came to me, the neck was a bit wavy, so I actually ripped the frets out, replaned the board, and refretted this instrument, and now it plays a treat. Let's talk about the good stuff. So Les Paul, as I said, designed these pickups in this circuit. Now Les Paul, he was kind of a huge pioneer in not only the guitar design and the pickup making world, but also the world of recording. He created some of the first multi-track mixing consoles, in his garage. He was really kind of a wizard, ahead of his time, on par with Leo Fender and all of those guys. Les had an ear for really clean, crystal, non-distorted tones. He really liked to be able to record directly into the board and not use an amp, so that he could get just sort of the purest tone out of his instrument. And to do so, he designed low impedance pickups. Many of the mixing consoles of the 50s and 60s on into the 70s had low impedance mic inputs. And if you plugged in a normal guitar pickup, it just would not sound very good. It would blow it out. So these low impedance pickups could be plugged right into a board, and you'd just get a really nice, even, clean sound with a really full frequency spectrum. Why that didn't kind of catch and continue on today, it's just, I think, the general consensus that the high gain amps like the Marshalls that were coming in the 60s and 70s, and all the hot pickups, you know, the humbuckers and everything. That's just the sound that everybody was after. We wanted more distortion, we wanted more breakup and everything. I personally feel the same way. I don't necessarily want a super clean bass tone. I think sometimes too clean and too active can sound a little bit sterile. But what's cool about low impedance is it really lets you shape the tone a bit more. When you start with low impedance pickups, you're starting with a much broader frequency bandwidth, and then you can play with those frequencies with your onboard preamp or your, you know, your rack mounted preamp or whatever. When you start with a high impedance pickup, maybe a really hotly wound single coil or something like that, you're actually starting with a narrower frequency bandwidth with more resonant, you know, peaks and character baked into the pickup, and you're not going to be able to shape that as much with tone controls. So I think Les was onto something with this, just like the Alembics as well. When you start with those low impedance activators, the filter really does a lot of magic with those pickups. What's interesting about this bass though is it is completely passive, and there's some wizardry going on here, albeit quite simple when you kind of break it down. So let's just start with the basics. We've got a master volume. We've got a three-way selector switch for the front, both, and rear pickups. We've got a high and low Z switch. So this is interesting. The original Les Paul recording bass had a low impedance, a low Z output, and then they included a little sort of plug adapter. So if you wanted to step it up, that plug adapter had a step-up transformer in it that would then turn the signal into a higher impedance that you could use with a regular amp. However, lots of people were losing them or forgetting to bring them to a gig. It was just kind of inconvenient. So in this iteration of these basses, they included the step-up transformer, which is just a little transformer hiding under this cover in the bass itself. So you can still, if you wanted to, you can still just use this bass as low Z, plug it right into a mixing board and let her rip. But as you can hear, drastically cuts the output, right? So definitely not something you're going to want to use with a normal amp. Then we have an in and out of phase switch, which works when both pickups are in play. You can get that out of phase sound, which is really cool. We have a tone control, which is exactly what you'd expect, a low pass filter that rolls off the highs, lets the lows through. And then we have a bass control, which is a high pass filter and actually scoops out the lows, leaving the high frequencies to cut through, which is nice for a little extra tone shaping, especially with how much bass this bass is capable of pumping out. And then where it gets really interesting is this three-way tone switch here. Now, if I understand this correctly, similar to Curtis Novak's BS-DS pickups with the coil tap, these pickups actually have 3 leads coming off of them. So you actually have 3 different levels of winding, 3 different resistances or impedances, if you will. And in the first position here, you have all the wire that's wound around this pickup. It's a super hot sound. It's very dark. It's very bassy, not a ton of treble, because that's what happens when you add more wire to a pickup. The resonant frequency shifts lower and lower. You get rid of high end. You add more low end. In the second position, we get rid of some of the wire. We get rid of, you know, however many winds, and we have a more balanced sound with a little bit more treble in the signal. And then further into the third position, even less wire, more treble, less bass. It gets a little thin. I really like the second position. It's kind of the most balanced, but 3 is really cool for just like absolutely earth-shaking subsonic frequencies. And what's cool about that is with this high pass filter, you can actually kind of dial back some of that bass and balance that sound out a little bit. So there are a ton of tones on this bass. I'm not going to be able to show you every sound this thing is capable of, but I'm just going to play some really simple bass lines and mess around with these controls so you can hear what this thing is capable of. In my opinion, this is a very underrated bass. It's kind of a clunker, but it plays really well, and there are some absolutely insane sounds that come out of this bass that are really unique to, you know, anything else that's out there. This would actually be a really cool bass to have in the studio. It's dead quiet, and there are tons of usable tones you can get out of it. I hope you enjoy. Hope you learned something. See you next time. Absolutely massive in that position. So let's stick there for a minute. We're on the front pickup, the neck pickup, with the most wire, the hottest, darkest sound. Let's play with these tone controls. There's already not a lot of treble, so I don't know. When we roll off the tone knob, the low pass filter, doesn't have much of an effect because there's already not that many high frequencies to play with. Crazy dub though. Awesome. Now the high pass filter, we can actually tame some of that bass a little bit. Kind of cool. So if we actually just turn that all the way back up and go to the second position, it's kind of the same as if you're in the third position with that bass rolled all the way off. And so you start to see how this kind of works. You know, in one sense, when you let all of the windings of this pickup through, you have just this absolute crazy amount of signal, a lot of low end, and then you're slowly just kind of peeling the layers away with these controls. Let's hear both pickups in and out of phase. Les Paul, for the advertisement copy for this bass, claims that this is capable of producing a P-bass-like tone. I don't personally hear it, but there's a lot going on here, so curious, any of you who have played these instruments before, have you found the P-bass tone in this bass?